Hello, everybody. Welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Culture Club. Today we're discussing Rouge, and today's event is also hosted by Bridge Michigan, if you didn't already know. Um, the Bridge Michigan staff that are on the call today are myself, Jacqueline Garrett, and Emma Carr. And thank you all for joining us today. In case you aren't familiar with us, Bridge Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source, covering issues that matter to you and your community. You can subscribe for free at bridgemi.com. And for those who are current Bridge Club members, which include any people who've donated to Bridge over the last year, they get a number of benefits, including access to a free electronic copy of each Bridge Culture Club selection. For those of you who aren't members, you can become a member today by visiting the link that we will drop into the chat in just a moment. Today, we are so lucky and thankful to be joined by Hamoody Jaafar and Razi Jafri. I'll give a full introduction of them momentarily, but we are incredibly honored that they were willing to join us for a discussion of their documentary. The schedule for today's discussion is this. I'll give a brief introduction of them and read their bios, and I'll lead a discussion with them for about 40 minutes, and then we'll take reader questions from the chat. So please do drop any questions you have about the film or about their creative process into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them in that last 20 minutes of the discussion. We will be recording, well, actually, we'll conclude at 1 p.m. And then we will be recording this discussion and posting that recording to Bridge's website, which is at www.bridgemi.com. And now I'll introduce Hamoody and Razi. Hamoody Jaafar is a Detroit-based director and producer. Hamoody's films include Detroit Diamond, which was filmed or previewed at the Cleveland International Film Festival in 2018, and Enter the Cavaliers, which was also shown at the Cleveland International Film Festival in 2020. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Wayne State University in Detroit. Razi Jafri is a Detroit-based filmmaker and producer. His credits include Hamtramck USA, which showed at South by Southwest in 2020, The Three Chaplains, which showed through PBS and Independent Lens in 2023. His work has been supported by Sundance Institute, Ford Foundation, Doris Duke Foundation, and the Knight Foundation. He's been awarded numerous fellowships by Impact Partners and the Sundance Documentary Producing Lab and Fellowship. Razi holds a bachelor's degree in engineering and an MFA, both from the University of Michigan. And now, with that, we will begin today's discussion. So, I just wanted to start with, the basics. What sparked this initial idea to focus on the River Rouge High School Panthers basketball team for a documentary? Please, tell us about how this film came to fruition, and do either of you have any personal connection with River Rouge or the area?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I mean, I grew up watching River Rouge like on Channel 3, and in the 90s, like just the local cable channel. And Brent Darby was like their best player at the time. And so I had a lot of familiarity just like from my childhood, but it had kind of been detached from the community and the high school for, a while. Kind of fast forward to 2019, I had just done that Enter the Cavaliers documentary, so I was looking to find some basketball stories locally. And there was an event, it was called the Ipsy Tip-Off Classic. It was like the launch of the 2019-2020 high school boys basketball season. And I went out to film a prospect by the name of Amani Bates, who was a sophomore in high school at the time. He was like, he might have been a junior actually, and he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was like the top prospect in Michigan. So I went to go film him and had a little filmmaking team that I went out with at Eastern Michigan, and we were denied access to his locker room actually, and by default, his opponent, like Ypsilanti Lincoln's opponent that night, was River Rouge. And so immediately, like it reconnected me to my childhood years and my early teen years. And so I just curiosity, what was going on with the program. And in that moment realized that like the late Brent Darby had a son who was there that night playing for his dad's coach. And they went out and won. So, so at that point we were just like, completely immersed. And that's kind of how it's kind of how we discovered it and started doing a lot of research. was completely ignorant and didn't know of like the Lofton Green years. So falling down that rabbit hole of research, I discovered all that and just realized like, wow, this is not only, like a contemporary story and documentary, but there's also a historical element to tell. And that was pretty much how it was born. I don't know if that answers it. I think it does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and then, Hamoudi and I were both, working class kids from downriver.
Yeah.
So, I think, there's also this connection and motivation to highlight stories from communities that we were a part of that you don't normally hear from. And, Hamoudi with his cinematic approach was able to like really elevate that story, to national and international stage because we've been able to show the film at film festivals. Some pretty big film festivals. And so, yeah, I just wanted to mention that we both have that connection to downriver and
Yeah.
these kind of stories.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm curious, I mean, how did your love for basketball and sports influence the telling of this story and the, conception of it?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I was a student athlete in high school. I mean, basketball is like, I mean, for me, basketball was it was like a gateway to acceptance and friendships when I was growing up downriver. So, like that camaraderie, that intimacy, that um, just wanting to be able to tell it in a way where the audience felt like they were a Rouge Panther and they were in the locker rooms with these student athletes, like was definitely the intention. Um, but yeah, I mean, definitely think having played sports in high school inspired a lot of like my familiarity of what to sort of instinctually go towards. Um, so yeah, I think just having played basketball and football my whole life, like, that was just as a storyteller, whether it's conscious or subconscious, like I feel like you just sort of have that taste or that intention.
What a natural, like, just way to be pulled in. Um, can you
Mhm.
describe the moment you decided to start filming? What was this back in 2019? And
Yeah,
what were your initial expectations for the project? I know the pandemic ended up kind of throwing a monkey wrench in later, but those initial expectations.
and that's a understatement there. So um, I think it was that night, like I didn't know what was going on with the program. When they won that game, I had I didn't think they were going to win, so I was just completely I mean, I then literally the next day I went to the high school and I went to the superintendent and I was like, I have to document this. Can you let me? And I went to the practice, went to their basketball practice that I think they played on, I want to say it was a Friday night. And I went on Monday to the high school and then I like brought my little black magic camera and just started to like get in front of the guys and propose an idea to the coach. And, that was pretty much, it was like, that weekend when I realized like the Lofton Green years and what they had accomplished and, during segregated times with an integrated high school, I just felt like, it had to be told. I was surprised it hadn't been told, to be honest. And so yeah, I think it was just like that after that first night of just reflecting, in that weekend, that first weekend, and then the first couple days of the following week.
Mhm. And what was it like working in with the River Rouge community, over the course of that couple years, including the players and coaches and sports figures? I mean, how did you land on those particular people to highlight those stories?
Yeah. Um, so I mean, the community is incredible. I mean, it's it's such a unique place, obviously historically, but I think the love that people have there is not that other communities don't have the same love, but it definitely feels like there's more of a connection. And I don't know if that's because of what transpired there historically, if it's just like a pride thing, but it being a blue collar town and having to sort of like roll up your sleeves and just kind of figure it out. I think that brings people together, and that's very like present. Like when you meet everybody, they're super supportive. I mean, they're the biggest fans of their own community. They feel like it deserves the same eyes on it as we did as storytellers. So that was like a really, it was just, we were completely in sync. Like, I think they were a little, they were flattered, but then also at the same time, we're like, well, about time, you know, kind of thing. So everybody was super accepting and everybody was very supportive. As far as like figuring out who to focus on, Brent Darby Jr.'s story was obvious because of his connection to his dad. And his dad's name being on the court and him coming there to kind of fulfill his dad's legacy. That was obvious, I think. And then Legend was just, he was the highest, um, he was probably the best prospect they had from a basketball perspective. He was being recruited all across the country. And then, Amani was just, he was just so charismatic. He was just so likable. He just had such a great story of like, he lives in Inkster and then buses into the community just to be a part of the program. So I think those were just, there was a few other stories that certainly could have made the cut, I think. So it was tough to kind of narrow in, and Razi can talk about this too. Like, it was tough to really narrow in on, like, we had 4 or 5 stories. We had 5 kids actually at first that we leaned in on. And then in the edit, we kind of had to really narrow in on those 3 to kind of keep everything in sync. And so, I think it's just all those layers. Like, they were just obvious, and it was tough to narrow in. But that was, I don't know if that answers it, but I think that's how.
Yeah, I think it was more than tough. It was like gut wrenching. I think Hamoody, yeah, beautifully described, like, the 3 athletes that we ended up deciding were going to be the main characters, but there were just so many that had such compelling stories, were such amazing athletes, but more importantly, were really um, um, like exceptional human beings as well as just as young people. And so it was really difficult. And, my role as a producer, I'm sort of working at the intersection of the commerce and the art of the film and the viability of the film. And so just, kind of being a thought partner in the edit and helping us identify, who those stories should be and how to still advance the main themes of the film while helping Hamoudi maintain his cinematic and creative vision to be able to tell that story. But yeah, this was in the summer of 2023 when we're editing the film, and it was just so difficult. And we had really tough conversations, but ultimately, you are trying to create this mosaic. And not everything can make it in. So you have to try to advance the best story possible with the most compelling characters and the most concise stories because you're working with, we knew it was going to be roughly a 90-minute film for several reasons. And so that part of it is just practical too, so we didn't have 3 hours. If we did, then yeah, we'd include everybody and their families and a lot more archives too. But it's a tough creative and viability decision that you have to make.
And Coach Stone too, like, was obviously, like, he's the one that his like presence of just being back at the program made the documentary obvious because
Mhm.
he was just, he was a coach there in the 90s. He was a former student athlete that had played for Coach Green. So he just brought it all together, from a historical to a
Yeah,
present lens.
yeah.
So, it was like we knew we wanted to focus on Coach, and then it was just, yeah, having to make tough decisions on which student athletes who makes the cut, and that, yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Stone, he's definitely like Kamudi said. I mean, he's the thread that ties the past and the present together. And yeah, Brent Jr. He plays that role a little bit too, with his connection between his dad and Coach Stone, and so the threads are really incredible too to be able to have those intergenerational connections between the characters in the film. So that that helped us make some decisions too.
I think that was such a powerful theme of the film as well, being able to tie all these people together through how interconnected they were through the years. Speaking of that history, seeing that black and white footage from the Lofton Green years was like incredible. And I know it could not have been easy to get. And I'm wondering, like, how did you guys get this archival gold? And how did you go about researching the legacy of this team and community in general?
Yeah, Google. Um, so there was like the MHSAA had, they had some VHSs, like VHS tapes on Coach Green. They had some state championship games that they had archived. We actually went into like the attic of the high school and found all these like 35 millimeter uh, film cartridges. And most of them were like damaged, like water damage from, I think there was like a leak in the roof at some point. But the ones that we were able to salvage, we sent to like Kodak in New York and they like redeveloped it for us. So we had like, I think 3 cartridges from like 4 different games that, we took one from the 50s, one from the 60s, one from the 70s, and just tried to like dial in on, what made the most sense to try to develop. And look, there's so much probably great footage that just like that's not in it. Because those years in the 60s were so, like from what I'm told, like the basketball side of it was just insane. Um, so there's a lot of like, it's tough to like pay homage to everybody. I mean, there was, like there's this guy named Willie Betts, excuse me, who was, I think, the only student athlete in the state of Michigan's history to win. He won 4 state championships, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year. And like I couldn't get any footage on him. But that's how we got what we got. The attic and the help, a little bit of an assist from the MHSAA.
Can you tell us what the MHSAA is for people who don't know?
It's the Michigan High School Athletic Association, I think is the exact translation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And how were you able to get a hold of those alumni that played on Lofton Green's team? Like I saw like people spread across many, graduating years and years they had played. I think, all of us are probably pretty curious. How did you get in touch with those people? Were they all locals still?
No. No. I mean, it wasn't easy because I think when you try to tell people, hey, I want to tell your story, they're like, well, who the hell are you? And excuse my language, but it's I think having been from downriver, like, having like I'm a minority as well, I think we were able to relate on certain things. And so it was just like making a pitch, like over the phone, getting connected through Lamonte. Um, and just kind of getting everybody bought into the vision. And then we cut together like a little 60-second like sizzle early on that I was just sharing to kind of give people an idea of like, look, this is kind of the direction we want to take it. So I think that helped get some buy-in, like, okay, these guys are, they want to try to do it right. So, their alumni were spread out, like Nicky Moulton was in Dayton, Ohio. He played college basketball there. He still lives there. Um, a lot of the guys that through Paul Green, actually, may he rest in peace, um, who's Lofton's son, he helped a lot too. He was living in Grand Rapids at the time, but he helped like kind of stitch together and bring at least like 5 to 10 alumni that would help be a part of it that we thought would help tell the story across the generations, like getting somebody from the 50s, like Blanche Martin, we went to East Lansing because he was a part of those mid 50s teams. And, um, you know, Paul Green, obviously in the early 60s, and Nicky Moulton in the early 70s. And so we tried to make sure that we were covering the time of like the whole era. So that's kind of how we made those decisions and narrowed in on who might be the best candidates, and then also like who could just physically be there, because Willie Betts would have been great, but he's in New York, and we had some logistical constraints, obviously being independent filmmakers trying to make this work on a dime. So that's kind of how it came together.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I'm so interested personally in how this all came together. Um, one of my questions as well here, there's a scene with a lot of gravity, I think, in the film at the Buck, which for those of you who may have seen it, it's the high school gymnasium that was closed alongside the adjoining school, in the 2000s, where former players, they reunite in this old gymnasium called the Buck. Can you talk a little bit more about that place and what it symbolizes to the players and the community?
Yeah, well, gosh, what's the Department of Health in Michigan? Like, there's a
EHHS.
yeah. Don't tell them about this, but we really probably should have even been in there, to be honest. I mean, it had been shut down for since I think the year 2000. So it was shut down. We were the first ones to re-enter in 20 years.
Wow.
So we, we just asked the superintendent if he was cool with it. And Mayor Campbell, who's the mayor now, I think it's his cousin actually, Phil, he um, was, I think he was the custodian at the school district. He had the keys to the building. So I think the scene in it too, like when you see us go in there for the first time and he kind of says, all right, like that was literally the first time we had gone in. And, I think it's such a visual representation of like a lot of like the all-encompassing parts of the story. I mean, it was like this state-of-the-art facility that was way ahead of its time, and you could really feel that energy when you're in there, like, wow, this place was special. And then it's also, really sad that it's in the decapitated state that it's in, and I think that obviously has to do with the economic decline of the area, and that was one of the main, I think they were telling us, like one of the main budget cuts that they had to make because of the maintenance and things. So it was really important, I think, for us to be able to be in there and then also hold our alumni interviews in there, just because we knew it would strike a lot of emotions from the past, a lot of nostalgic sort of vibrations, and that was why, we wanted to use it as a backdrop for the interviews, of the alumni at least.
Yeah, I think it was a really bold, creative choice. If the buck wasn't like in the film, it would have been like a gaping hole in the in the River Rouge story, not just for the basketball legacy, but for the community's legacy because of what the buck meant and represented to the community. It was sort of like center court, for decades, and played such a significant role. I think as I was alluding to earlier with not being able to get certain characters in the films, but also themes too. There's a whole story with River Rouge in terms of its education and school district, its economic history, its cultural history, but also its environmental history. A lot of people may or may not know this, but River Rouge is the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan. And so that carries a lot of generational trauma and impact, on the communities that are impacted by the literal fallout from heavy industry, over time. And so, that also, I think like the buck is sort of encapsulating all these things without, us being heavy-handed, with all of that history. It allows us to sort of tease at some of those themes and, without being so on the nose about it. But I think it represents a lot of achievements, failures, and achievements, again, for the community. So it's sort of a character in the film. So that's important. So
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about, obviously Rouge is about, it's a sports, documentary, but there's also this reverence for like the deeper historical and cultural context of the area. I mean, with all the filming you all did, how did you balance that? I guess maybe is a good question.
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's a great question because there were elements or there were times where we're like, well, do we, you know, go and document and capture, the steel mills or some of the older factories where everybody, or their parents lived and worked. Um, do we talk about the historical side of River Rouge being like a vital vital part of like the Industrial Revolution and World War II. And, there was just, there's just so many, like we could tell a whole documentary just on the place outside of the basketball program and legacy. So I think we just had to make some difficult decisions of like narrowing in. And I think like the logistical side of it obviously lent itself into making those decisions, because if we had like an open-ended budget or something, we may have probably told more layers or dove a little deeper or used some of the other like subplots or supporting elements of the place and the history. But we knew it was a basketball story, and I think that was just like those are just the decisions you have to make.
What were some of those challenges and rewards of capturing the team's quest, for this 15th state championship? Bringing us back to the present, at least here.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, what were some of the challenges and the rewards of capturing the team's quest for the 15th state championship that they were looking towards?
Yeah, the challenges were COVID, because, you know, so it's funny. So they go out and win that first game that year that I wasn't expecting them to win. And then we start committing to telling the story, like the documentary, and then they lost like their very first home game. And I was like, oh shoot, are we doing the right thing here? And it's funny because that and you see it in the film. I think that's the first game we get into within the edit, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mhm.
And from there on, they didn't lose. Like they literally won. I think it was like 20 games in a row. And I believe in my heart and soul they were going to win a state championship. I really believe that. And everybody I think knows that was there in the audience, or that was following us game by game. Like there was just something special going on, because they were not, they had lost. And that's what's so interesting about the story is like that year, I know Brent Darby Jr. was there, and like we focus on these student athletes, but they were overlooked. Like nobody was expecting them to finish number one in the state. Like they had lost, I think 4 or 5, no, I'm sorry, they lost 7 seniors from the previous season. So it was like and they had gone to the state championship the year before, like literally the season before we documented, they lost in overtime in the state championship. So they were state champ runner-ups, and they had lost a lot of seniors. So nobody was really expecting them to compete on the level that they did. But we just sort of saw and felt something, and then I think something special just happened during the regular season where they weren't losing, and their first 2 games that they won in the state tournament, like they won their first game. Second game was at Fortson High School. They won by like 45 points. And that was March 10th, I think, or March 9th, Tuesday. And then like, yeah, March 11th hits and everything's over. And so that was like gut wrenching, and you can feel it in the room, because it was like, well, wait a minute, no one's ever encountered, like, we're canceling the state basketball tournament. Like, what the heck? So that was definitely the most challenging part of it, because you go in to tell a story about a state championship journey, and an international pandemic that's never occurred, like, stops that. And then you have to like really figure out and lean in and like, what's the ending here? Like what are we trying to say with this? And so that was definitely the most challenging part. But I think the most like rewarding part was seeing where their journeys took them over the next 2-3 years, and what they had accomplished in that season, and how we'll have it forever, because it's documented. And so yeah, that's my answer to that.
I'm wondering, you mentioned it. I mean, the elephant in the room is that the pandemic definitely, as I said earlier, threw a monkey wrench in, your plans, to say it lightly. How did the pandemic affect filming, once you realized that the story just wasn't going to go the way you had hoped it would?
Well, obviously, took away like we envisioned as our climax going into it. Um, I think after that, it was just like trying to like lean into what was going to happen after. And, You know, Amani had committed to his school. Like, well, there's a lot of stuff that didn't make the edit. Like, we had documented, you know, Amani committing to his JUCO, his junior college. Um, at that time, it was like very COVID heavy. So it was like a drive-by block party that his parents had put on because you had to socially distance and everything. You know, we documented graduation. Um, so it was challenging just trying to figure out like what are we supposed to be filming? And then I think as time progressed, like, you know, Legend ends up back with Lamonte at Eastern, and now they're at UAD, which we probably should update for the ending. But, you know, like those things became obvious because it's like, oh, wow. So Lamonte's now coaching Legend in college. Kind of interesting. That's what he did with Brent, you know? So that like
Mhm.
just naturally happened. We didn't plan for that. And so like, I feel like that was just us being patient and, you know, it helped sort of strengthen the ending, in my opinion. So yeah, it was just like letting time dictate what we needed to film.
Can you share any, I mean, I've heard a couple just like from these questions and this discussion, but can you share any other memorable anecdotes or unexpected moments that occurred, during filming that ended up really shaping the documentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, that speech that Coach Parker gives, he's the athletic director and football coach, and he's now the defensive backs coach at University of Illinois. It's fascinating how a lot of these community members have gone on to like really prestigious, noteworthy careers, and it's always been like a fabric of River Rouge, so I'm not surprised. Um, but yeah, I think Coach Parker's speech that opening night against, because in the edit you don't really know, like we kind of obviously we placed it in the edit and you don't really know what game it is necessarily. You could think it's that Hamtramck game, but in reality it was actually that Ypsilanti Lincoln game when they beat Imani Bates. So that was just like when you're in that locker room and you heard that, like, you wanted to run through a wall. And so that was just like, that was really special. Obviously, like being there for COVID, like when they were told the tournament was canceled, we'll never forget that. And then, like being there, watching Legend play Division I basketball with Lamonte was really special. I think that was like kind of a culmination of everything that we had set out to capture because the whole time it was, thematically, it was like, this story's bigger than basketball. Like the basketball side of it's obvious, but it's about becoming, a better man or version of like a citizen of society. And I think all of those sort of just like kind of culminated in real life. So yeah, those are like the three things that I think stick out to me. And then, Sada Baby, who's like a local rapper, who's a good friend, who is a big basketball fan, and like a lot of his lyrics are driven by the game, and him being selfless enough to show up and surprise them, and those are just like iconic moments that I think, from a filmmaking perspective, like you just don't forget, that just resonate, even years after.
Yeah, you mentioned that pep talk in the locker room from the Coach Parker. That was top tier. I had a group of people watching it with me, in preparation for this, and I think we all felt that moment in the film. Like that felt like peak
He's a
the
special
peak
guy.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to be like a head coach in college football or the NFL. Like, just, remember that, because I really believe that's going to happen. Incredible man and leader. And um, so, yeah, like his charisma, you just feel it. His passion, his authenticity, it's all very real.
And, this film, it touches on, so many themes you've talked about, like resilience and determination and community pride. I mean, how do you see these themes resonating with audiences just beyond the world of sports? Like, this is a story about sports, but I think these themes are so much bigger than sports. I mean, how do you see this kind of fanning outward, and how do you see it really resonating with people?
Razi, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think basketball is the gateway in this film to those other themes. And there's so many communities like River Rouge. In many ways, it's obviously very unique, but in other ways, it's the story of a lot of American towns, factory towns, mining towns, places that people have forgotten about. But their stories are important. The people in those communities are important, you know. And there's really beautiful stories in all these places. And I think for us that was also really important because we come from such similar places that are like adjacent. I went to high school in Taylor. Grew up part of my childhood there, part of it in Detroit. Um, and so I think there's also a part of it where like, these communities are often not seen and we feel invisible. And so I think that's also an important part of this too, and beyond like the social and political and economic and environmental issues in these communities. It's also important to show that it's not just, poor people struggling. It's also the resilience of mankind and humankind and how people overcome such great barriers, and River Rouge is no different than that. And so, while the community's a humble place, the stakes are so big, because people are just trying to build a better life for themselves. Basketball for, the students there that are playing at that level happens to be just one way that some people are able to do that. But I think it's important, and it's been really great touring, with the students and audiences that get to like interact with them, learn about what they're doing. Some of them are involved in basketball, some of them are not. With Brent, like he tried his hand at basketball, trying to play on the junior college level, and decided that his true calling was music. And those of you that saw the film know that he's working on a degree in music production and hopes to have a career in music. Whatever your passion is, I think the experience of growing up in a community like River Rouge, our point is to show that character development that can make you successful in whatever you choose. If you want to be a dentist, if you want to be a professional athlete, if you want to be a music producer, the foundation is there in a lot of these communities. And it's not sexy like a lot of the work that's happening on the ground in a community like River Rouge. But there are some remarkable things. Like Hamoody has taken me to the school, since I joined, the project in 2022, and just seeing the resilience and seeing the innovative thinking that a community like River Rouge has to, think about when it comes to sustaining the school district. And the way that they have brought in students from neighboring communities and just to be able to survive. And again, we've talked about this so much, but there's so many parts to a story about a community like River Rouge that we wish we could just tell, all the time, because that's one of the driving engines of what makes America what it is these communities sustaining themselves through their resilience and grit, while facing overwhelming barriers sometimes. Um, so I think, yeah, those are some of the themes, and those are some of the things that drew us, to the story, and they want us to, inspire us to like tell more stories like this.
I hope people like
So
walk away and say like, wow, like that occurred there. Like,
yeah, of all places, or yeah.
just like especially like in the green years, I think um what they did is like, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's one other high school in America that's ever won that many and that amount of like what they did in the 60s. And there's a line in the film that's like, there's the Boston Celtics, there's the UCLA Bruins, and there's the River Rouge Panthers. That is a very big statement. And I think, um, like that's what I want it. I hope people watch and say, wow, I didn't know this. I didn't know about this place. I didn't know this happened there. And I'm intrigued, and I think and that it deserves its, tip of the cap, like it's celebrated. So that's, I think, hopefully what people walk away thinking and feeling that don't know about it.
Love that. I have a couple more questions here before we transition into the questions that people dropped into the Zoom chat. So if, people who are listening, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask to the filmmakers, please do drop them into the chat. Um, So I'll wrap up my questions though. I mean, were there any specific documentaries or filmmakers who inspired your approach to Rouge? And if so, I mean, how did you incorporate those influences into your own storytelling style?
I mean, I'm a big, like, I come from a narrative background, so this is like my first sort of stab at documentary length stories. And I'm inspired by like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola and, um, like first generation immigrants that, um, were inspired by their communities and inspired by their upbringings and their, so like those are the storytellers that have always like inspired me. And I think I just wanted to I wanted to capture it in a way that was super cinematic because I felt like it deserved, like it felt like it was a movie. So that was unfolding. So like we wanted to ensure that when we shot it, that it was, captured in that way. So, it's not a traditional way of capturing documentaries. Maybe it is now, becoming more so, Razi, right? Like, maybe not, actually, I don't know. But we used, anamorphic lenses and a couple Arri Alexa minis. Like we really tried to creatively capture it in a way that was like a lot bigger, And those like
Yeah, there's
those close-ups, those like that was like important to like not be shy, like really just blend in and really be in it. Um, and that, that was developed with comfortability and trust. And like the first couple weeks of footage weren't nearly as strong as, maybe the last couple months because it naturally became more normal. And it was like, eventually it was like we weren't even there. So, yeah.
yeah,
And you both have worked. Oh, I'm sorry, Razi, what was
I know,
that?
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask. I mean, I shameless plug here. I mean, you both have worked on other projects before this. And I'm sure our listeners are curious about, other projects you want to highlight in the past or anything upcoming you have that you'd like to share and think people might be interested in.
I mean, for me, I have just two that have been kind of percolating in my brain. Like, one is like this, what's happening at the University of Detroit Mercy right now, which is where Legend is. He's going to have his senior season there next year. Coach Stone is there now as well. And then ironically, Coach Stone's son, Lance, is committed to play there next season. So there's a big part of me that wants to really put in time, effort, and resources into like potentially documenting that. And then outside of that, I just have like a couple ideas, and Rousey knows about them, that are just more about um, like Arab American driven stories that are like real life inspired stories from the 80s in like the south end of Dearborn and the city of Detroit. And they're like tied into like, immigration stories, American stories, some organized crime stories. I don't know if you know about like the old Hazel Park Raceway that's no longer there, but um, there's just like a lot of history that's untold. And so those are like kind of the ones I have. But I run a mortgage company right now. Like my company's called Neighborhood Mortgage Company. We're in Dearborn. I'm a father of two. I have two under two daughters under two. There's a lot of there's not as much time as there used to be. But those are like, I think some passion projects that I, would love to maybe fulfill.
Yeah, I think the theme wise, it's very similar for me. Like, we're both, Muslim. We both come from immigrant families. And I think, there's a lot of stories that are left out of the national discourse, about our community. And that for me is what was one of the motivations for making my first film, Hamtramck USA, which explores life and elections and the civic process and America's first Muslim majority city. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of my work focuses on the Muslim American experience. I'm dedicating the next few projects to focus on American activism for Palestine, given the genocide in Gaza, and now what we're seeing, the ethnic cleansing take place in Gaza. And so this is a historic moment where we have to tell these stories because this is unfortunately a big stain on our moral consciousness. And so we had several movements last year with the uncommitted movement. So I'm finishing a documentary about that, and then one about the University of Michigan and student activism at the University of Michigan right now, as students are facing felony and misdemeanor charges by the state of Michigan. So very much focused on local stories still, but the stakes are very high, in all these stories. And Hamoody and I will likely work together again on things. And we both have individual projects as well, and we're both very busy, and the creative juices are flowing. And we hope to see, we hope to get a lot of projects out into the world in the coming years, and we have a lot to say. And I think Rouge was very inspiring and motivating for us to like get our voices out there in this way, and make an even bigger splash with the next projects that we're working on. So.
We are so excited to hear about what's coming next. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And really quick, before I transition into some of our questions from listeners, for people who might want to view Rouge in the future, outside of a special event or a special screening, what could you tell them? How could they find this in the future?
So I think you can follow us on social media. We'll be posting updates. We have an Instagram and a Facebook account. They're both Rouge_documentary, right, Hamoody? So I think both would work on Instagram and Facebook. But the sort of bigger news is that we are speaking to a distributor right now who will hopefully arrange our digital distribution. So you'll be able to rent the film very soon on Amazon and iTunes and YouTube Premium and other platforms. So the film will be widely available, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the next month or so as we finalize our distribution contract. So we just have a few things to work out. But yeah, and we can let Bridge know. So if you want to pass it along to your community as a social media update or as a story, just letting people know, then the film will be widely available to watch at that point. So.
Yeah, we will be glad to share that out. Many folks in our member community were able to access the film, but there are folks who are tuning in more broadly who didn't really have the opportunity to watch, who I know once they see this discussion, they'll start looking for it. So we'll be sure to keep ear to the ground on when that happens so that we can share that information out with folks. So I'll transition into some reader submitted questions before we close out. I wanted to ask, Susan had a question. Has there been a showing of the film in the River Rouge community? And if so, what was the reaction, and what was your reaction to their reaction?
Yeah, we did it. Well, we premiered at Freep. So a lot of community members made it out to that screening, which is it was a really special night.
Yeah, it's a 1,200 seat theater at the Detroit Film Theater, sold out opening night of the Freep Film Festival for our Michigan premiere. It was amazing to see like so many of the alumni coming in their Letterman jackets and blazers, and there was just a lot of maroon in the house. So
a lot of emotions,
a lot of emotions.
people were, I mean, when people ask, and even when we were in Cleveland, there was just like local folks that
Yeah.
into the festival that were, dressed in their 1967 high school jackets, and like it was yeah, I mean, everybody's been super positive and supportive, and everyone's, I think, proud of us. I hope. Well, they have been. Hopefully they continue. Yeah, no, it's been really positive.
I think for us, it's surreal seeing like, people showing up in like Letterman jackets from the 50s, 60s, 70s, seeing themselves on screen and feeling seen. And yeah, I mean, that night. And I mean, we had our world premiere and international premiere at the Cleveland Film Festival and at the Hot Docs International Film Festival in Toronto. But I think the Detroit experience like far exceeded those two. Even though in a way they're bigger stages, but it far exceeded emotionally and just everything that we could do for the community. It felt like, here's the gift, here's our homage to you.
Yeah,
And then recently, I guess it was maybe about 5 months ago, right, Hamoudi, we did show the film in River Rouge,
yeah.
at the high
And a new
school. And
gymnasium
yeah.
redesign. So they a part of like them revealing the new gymnasium. Um, we screened it there for, I think it was a couple hundred community members, just like an
Mhm.
auditorium, and so that was really nice too.
Yeah.
But we are insanely like eager and excited to get it out, so people can just readily watch it whenever they want.
We had a question from William. So, in all of your research and digging, he was curious. This might be a little niche. Did anyone reference Our Lady of Lourdes, another Rouge high school, which had successful team backs in the
Yeah,
teams
Lord's
in the
was
60s?
it was across the street, I think, which was like kind of wild. So they did, it just wasn't enough there, I think, to like tie it into the larger story. I think it's just like a really unique part of the story, but yeah, definitely the alumni. I mean, they brought it up several times. Um, but just wasn't enough there, I think, to like because the historical side of the story could have had its own doc, and I think being able to stay focused on, you know, the main, which like the contemporary side. I think if you get into Lords and all that, it would have just taken its own turn, and so it was. That's why we, wasn't in there, but it was definitely it was definitely brought up quite a few times.
Love that. We did have a note here. Someone in the crowd here, Thomas, he mentioned that he graduated from River Rouge High School in 1969 and that you all did a great job of getting the essence of the Lofton Green era. He said that Lofton Green was a close personal friend. So
Hmm.
your work has reached a River Rouge High School graduate, at least here on this call. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no, appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
We have a question here. I mean, you both have non-traditional, or this is from Mark, you both have non-traditional backgrounds for filmmakers. Can you share, pretty briefly how you all got into the film industry?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely both do. I, gosh, so when I graduated from Wayne State, I moved to Los Angeles and I tried to pursue a career in acting. And I realized quickly, just kind of like getting, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Advice from folks of like, how do I get myself out there? The one thing that everyone kept coming back to was like, well, put yourself in your own projects, so that's where I started to like write and direct, and realized quickly that I was was probably better suited behind the camera, and I was more passionate about those details. So after spending a few years out there, I moved back to Michigan in 2012, 2013, and got a job at Quicken Loans, and just like learned the mortgage business, but like also raised money to finance in my own projects, my own short films. And that's kind of how it took off. And it's funny because I've like mortgages in Southeast Michigan are such a backbone of the economy, and it's helped me tremendously like pursue my passion projects. And it's still to this day, like, I was a banker and used that money to invest in independent films, and then worked at a production company for almost 5 years, and pandemic hit, you know, times got really tough. I was getting married, went back to it, and now I'm in it now on another level. And it's interesting, but that's how it happened for me. I mean, it was just, I knew I always wanted to tell stories. I knew I wanted to be an actor, but then I realized I, probably should be behind the camera. And my uncle, my late uncle, um, you know, he's probably what put it on my radar at a really early age, because he was tied into all these like famous Egyptian actors. He came through Ellis Island in the 50s, and he had a movie theater on Cass um, in the late 70s, where he screened like Middle Eastern and Greek films. And then he opened like an independent kind of like Blockbuster. It wasn't Blockbuster, it was his own. It was called International Video. It's on Schaefer and Ford Road in East Dearborn. And my dad would take me there every Saturday to like visit him. Of course, I would always go back with a movie, you know, a VHS in my hand. So I think that's where it all was born and kind of evolved. And, you know, I think it's just like, yeah, I mean, that's just from a place of passion, I think.
Yeah, I have a slightly different kind of story. I mean, I grew up very creative, like drawing, sketching. So my childhood dream was to be an architect. But I think towards the end of high school, I got scared that I wouldn't make enough money and I wouldn't have job stability. So I chose engineering. And both of those things, paid off. Like I had stable work and I made good money, but I just wasn't happy doing it. And so, yeah, after a long time, I decided to quit and I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do because film wasn't like a thing that I mean, I love watching movies and independent films and documentaries my whole life, but it wasn't something I was drawn to. But after leaving corporate America, I just started throwing myself into art, all kinds of art, printmaking, ceramics, photography. And I started getting very serious about photojournalism and documentary photography. And in 2016, when Trump got elected the first time, a friend of mine and we decided to make a documentary about Hamtramck because of the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant animus during that campaign, which has sadly only gotten worse in this period. We wanted to tell the story of a community from its own perspective and from its own voice. And so we made this humble film about Hamtramck. The film got into a major film festival, South by Southwest, and that's sort of what validated that, hey, this is something that is really fun. I love doing it, and I'm kind of off to like a good start. And unfortunately, that was during the pandemic. The film was set to premiere in 2020. March 13th was our premiere for Hamtramck USA. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to do it, but it was enough of a boost to give me like the validation that I needed, like, hey, this is what I want to do with my life. And so I produced a film called Three Chaplains. It's available on PBS's YouTube platform now. Then produced Rouge, and now I'm working on a bunch of other things. But yeah, it's definitely a very non-traditional path. And I sometimes joke that I'm much more broke, but I'm a lot happier doing what I love now. And I hope to continue to tell stories. And it's been very fulfilling so far. So
One of our guests here, Elizabeth, asked, is Hamtramck USA available for viewing or no?
yeah, so if you look up Hamtramck USA on the easiest place is Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime, you can find it there. I believe it's available also on iTunes as well. It's the only film with Hamtramck in its title, so it's not too hard to find. So, but Amazon is, I mean, I think it's like $1.99 to rent or something on Amazon. So, yeah, you can check it out there. It's a feel-good story, so I hope you watch it. It's a very happy ending.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And, before I close out, I just want to remind all of our listeners here that we will follow up as we get more details for folks who might be interested in seeing Rouge in the future. As that happens, we'll make sure those details reach all of our listeners, who are here today and who are interested as well. So I'm going to close this out. I just want to say thank you to Hamoody and Razi for making time out of their very busy lives, as well as the Bridge team who've been here to help out along the way. And thank you to all of our guests who tuned in today as well. We will be posting the recording on our Bridge Michigan YouTube channel this week, so keep an eye out. And the recording will also show on our events page on our new app. Culture Club events are held every other month, and this is the first one for 2025. So thank you all for joining. Keep your eye on your inbox for a post-event survey where we'll be asking for suggestions for books, films, and podcasts for us to consider for the rest of the Culture Club events in 2025. And reminder that if you'd like to be eligible to receive our next Culture Club selection, consider becoming a Bridge Club member today. Thank you all again, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having us. It's an honor to be with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
But